Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the New Horizons Speaker Series hosted by our wonderful Department of Family and Community Medicine here at the University of Toronto. My name is Danielle Martin, and I have the honor of being the chair of our department, as well as a family doc at Women's College Hospital. I'm so excited about this conversation we're going to be having this morning with our special guest, Katherine Henderson, who we'll be introducing in just a moment. As you all know, she is the President and Chief Executive Officer at Hockey Canada. But before we jump into that conversation, and just by way of a land acknowledgement, those of you who have attended this series before know that the whole series was inspired by this beautiful piece of art by Merrill McMaster, who is one of my personal favorite artists, a Canadian artist with Plains Cree, British and Dutch ancestry. She makes these phenomenal photographs, and this one is called Lead Me to Places I Could Never Find on My Own. It's the second of a series with the same name. And if you haven't had a chance to get to know her work, we'll put a link to her website in the chat. She's given us permission to use this image in which she pictures herself taken at the Badlands in Grasslands National Park, which is a dark sky preserve. So a place where, unlike many places where we all live, you can really see the stars. And in describing the meaning of the birds on the top of her hat, she explains that these are birds who navigate by the stars. And therefore, this is about finding our way, using nature in part as our guide. And what we're trying to do in this speaker series is to really find our way in family medicine by using a much broader, up and out, and using a much broader range of disciplines to learn from as we navigate our way through our own journey as family doctors. And so with that important piece of learning, I'm going to turn to our speaker this morning. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Katherine Henderson. Katherine, as many of you know, was named President and CEO of Hockey Canada on July 4th of last year. So it's been just over a year in this critical leadership position. And before joining Hockey Canada, Katherine, you were the CEO of Curling Canada. So from one iconic Canadian sport to another. And while you were at Curling Canada, you successfully led initiatives to introduce new Canadians to the sport. You spearheaded work on pay equity for the Canada men's and women's curling teams, and you drove a total financial turnaround of the organization. And prior to that, you've held various leadership and marketing roles for the Toronto 2015 Pan Am and Para-Pan Am Games, Whirlpool Corporation, and many more. So you have an illustrious history at a wonderful series of organizations. And I think we all know that you joined Hockey Canada at a time that was not an easy time. But before we get into that, we have a video that we know you wanted to share. Just as the video is loading up, a reminder that there will be opportunities for questions. So please use the Q&A function at any point during the session.
She goes far down! Sarah Nurse scores the Moncton Flyers!
The Stony Creek Sabres flies it again. Overtime winner! Zavala got loose puck. Everybody's the buzzer! Canada has won gold! A golden goal!
so much for your support.
Joshua walks in, Edwards in the sky! Dylan Gunther, golden goal in Halifax! Canada's won back-to-back World Junior gold medals!
Welcome, Katherine Henderson, CEO of Hockey Canada. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Oh, thank you all very much. Merci to le monde. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we all know that, I mean, that was a beautiful video, and hockey, like healthcare, is a defining element of our Canadian fabric. And yet you joined Hockey Canada at a really difficult time. Are you willing to share with us just briefly a little bit about what was going on in the sport and in the organization when you first joined?
Yeah, there was a lot going on, and I think most people, anyone that's read a paper or listened to the news over the last couple of years would know exactly what was going on. There was a scandal. It related really to one incident in London in 2018, but I think what began to happen over that time and under pretty intense scrutiny is that the Canadian public really began to lose trust and faith in the organization. That I would say, because it's hockey and it's Canada, and just given sort of the status of the sport, rightly so, the public had held Hockey Canada up to a particular standard, and Hockey Canada didn't meet that standard, and had done some things that I think the community rightly called them out on, and it was time for change. So that's really the time when I walked in, and I've been there about a year. I was announced on July the 4th, but I actually started on September the 4th, so it has been just about a year.
Well, happy anniversary.
Yeah.
That first year must have been really intense. You were trying to turn around, as you say, build trust and turn around the image of an organization. You had lost, of course, the prior CEO had left, but as I understand, like most or all of the board. So a complete turnaround in governance, and a lot of work to be done around showing, not just telling, about Hockey Canada's commitment to safety for women in particular, for its players, for diverse people coming in or wanting to come into the sport, and yet the weight of this huge tradition that is so important to people. And that must have been a really, I can't even imagine what a difficult line that must have been for you to walk as a leader. In family medicine, we often talk about how, two things can be true at the same time, two seemingly opposite things. On the one hand, as family doctors, we have tremendous joy in our work. We feel honored to take care of our patients and be members of our communities. And yet also at the same time, we feel like we're often fighting against failures in the system, and it's hard to kind of keep the faith as we struggle to navigate systems that aren't necessarily easy for our patients. And I feel like there's a parallel here somehow, in that hockey is, of course, all of the joy that we just saw in that video. And that's my kind of video. It totally, warms my heart. And yet at the same time, we're at this really, or we were a year ago at this really difficult point in the journey. How did you go about the process of trying to reconcile those two truths?
Yeah, so as you mentioned before, I come out of the sports system, so I had an understanding of the systemic challenges we were going to have. So I agree with you. There's the Hockey Canada scandal, and there's lots of layers to that. That we can talk about if you want. But then there is, I would say, the Hockey Canada scandal, the Alpine Canada, Gymnastics Canada, all of these things that are coming out is really, I would say, symptomatic of a larger systemic issue. And forgive me because I don't understand the whole medical system in Ontario. Although I will mention my father, well, he's a retired physician and graduated from U of T. But while I may not understand it, what I can say, there's a long tradition and a system that's been built that may not be fit for purpose in 2024. And I think what starts to happen is we've got a very fractured and disjointed and not aligned system. So you end up with, and I'll just use an example. I'll use Ontario since I happen to be sitting on, in the middle of Toronto right now. Hockey Canada is an entity that kind of oversees programs and services and national teams. At the same time, the Ontario Hockey Federation sits on top of Hockey Eastern Ontario, Hockey Northern Ontario, the Ontario Women's Hockey Association, and they in turn sit on top of leagues like the Greater Toronto Hockey League, the Ontario Minor Hockey League. And they sit on top of teams. And my son went through that process. And every one of those teams has House League and Select and A, all the way up to AAA. And so I had a child that played quite a bit of hockey at a fairly high level that also went through that system. And even as the CEO of Hockey Canada, sometimes I'm quite bewildered as to how do you navigate that whole system. So I think what happens is you've got a system that is ultimately not serving the purpose that it's meant to do, which is to serve. The system itself starts to, become almost an entity that sucks energy out of what it is that we're supposed to be doing right now, which is getting children and youth and Canadians on the ice playing a game where they feel the kind of joy and happiness that you would see in that video at any level. Whether it's the first time you step on the ice, and you saw lots of examples of children taking their first steps on the ice, right up to winning a gold medal at the Olympic or Paralympic Games. We've got a system that continually sort of almost subverts some of that joy. But at the same time, it's not serving what people expect of sport nowadays. And sport isn't just about keeping healthy and fit. It's about community, but it's also about safety, and it's about camaraderie, and it's about welcoming. And so we've got systemic issues, and then we've got cultural issues, and then we have just plain old Hockey Canada issues that we need to solve for.
So you're describing, it seems to me like, obviously at a whole bunch of different levels, some of what you're describing are almost like operational challenges, too much heavy bureaucracy, too many layers, making it hard to get the resources to the front lines. We're familiar with that challenge in healthcare. And, I think some of us dream that a single person might be able to come in and kind of wave a magic wand to fix it. And then there's all those cultural and other challenges that you mentioned that I want to talk about. But just on the operational turnaround, like we live in a system where we are still using fax machines to send referrals to specialists, and we send something off and 6 weeks later we get a note back saying it's been rejected and try somebody else. And we can't access physio for our patients who don't have private coverage through their employer or prescription drug coverage. We're constantly trying to figure out, we're all on these WhatsApp groups where it's like, does anyone know a place that will do a sleep study for a child, or can anyone? So that sense of, so many layers and so much difficulty getting the resources to the front lines where they're needed. How did you, as a seasoned CEO, come in and address that? What was your approach around that part of your challenge?
Yeah. Well, at first, I do something very similar. I have a chat group with a bunch of CEOs, and we ask each other those very similar questions. But I think it's kind of you have to look at it from two ends. I mean, first, Hockey Canada, I think we needed to start looking at it and hold ourselves accountable in a way. You don't get away with being sloppy in terms of the business that you run because it's sport. It's highly volunteer driven and whatnot, but the actual business of being Hockey Canada, what we needed to do is to make sure that we had, I would call it the basics. First of all, we had to understand our purpose, our mission, our vision. So led the board, brand new board all through that. Also, brand new COO, CEO, CFO. The whole top layer of management and the entire board had stepped down. So we are all new. So, where do we want to get to? I think that's the first, one of the first things you have to do. And what is our mission? Like, what is our role in all of this? I think the second part is to stand up and be accountable. If you're expecting, if the public is looking for accountability and transparency from the organization, you have to make sure that you actually build the organization out so that it can provide that. So, we went through a kind of a whole process of taking a look at risk assessment, getting the right people in place. There's been quite a bit of hiring, and the hiring related to the priorities of the organization. But like you, I mean, I'll give an example, and I don't want to totally go down this rabbit hole, but one of our I guess our mandates is to make sure that every Canadian has the opportunity to have a hockey experience of their choice, and it should be a really good one. And when we say every Canadian, we realize there are multiple barriers to keeping Canadians away from the ice. It's an expensive sport. You have to transport to get there. It's played on ice. It's got safety equipment involved. But even, trying to figure out ourselves, well, what is it that Canadians want and need? We have a huge database, which we can barely use because of privacy laws. And, and I know you have sort of similar things with electronic health records, and there's all sorts of things that come really from sort of outside your ecosystem that limit sort of the power of what it is that you can do because of other concerns, and they're not linking up very well. I truly believe that the sport, Sport Canada and the national sport organizations that sit under Sport Canada, we're like an NGO. We're not a government. We're a government-funded agency, but most of our funding comes from outside government. We don't really have a strong link into health. To me, that's mind-boggling that we don't have a link to health and we're sport. We don't have a link into the school system. Most of the sport that most of us experienced, if your parents didn't sign you up for something, you were learning basketball and volleyball and soccer and everything at school. And we don't have really good links to our school system. And once again, I'm sure you all feel it. We're in a federated model where we have a national body and we have 13 different provincial and territorial members, all of whom have their own rules and regulations that sit underneath us. So to try and get sort of a consistent experience for everyone is very, very difficult. So part of what you have to do is to be a strong, good organization that has a good policy framework around how you deliver programs and services. But then I think the second part is really understanding the larger environment in which you're operating and what the limitations of that are. And I think thirdly, and probably the most critical thing, and maybe if I could be so bold as to do an analogy of a doctor with a patient, you have to listen to what people are telling you that they need. And I think Hockey Canada, and I would say most sports, have not been good at that. They've sort of sat kind of above the fray a little bit and never really asked parents and children, so what do you need out of this experience? And I've said this so many times that I think the people that I work with are just really tired of me saying it, but because there's a culture in hockey, said when somebody new to the game tells you what it is that they need and want, it's not a compromise to give it to them. It's a gift that they're telling you. They're telling you how to deliver a service better. Listen, don't shrug your shoulders and go, wow, that sounds difficult. The answer is, anything new is difficult. So what we have to do is we have to start listening to our constituents, or we're going to cease to be relevant.
That is such a profound truth. And I agree that there's an analogy there, both at the individual level with our patients and also at the level of our discipline and our healthcare system that haven't always been set up to either ask or to honor what we are told when we do ask. So you've talked about this, I know, before, the concept of turning Hockey Canada into a listening organization. How did you do that? What are the concrete steps in becoming a listening organization from your perspective?
Yeah, well, no, it's a good one, and it's something that it's not just one and done either. You can't just listen once. It's an ongoing conversation. But I will say, just to start off with, within the organization, I did a little bit of restructuring to make sure that executives were listening to one another. It's ludicrous to think that, our high performance department wouldn't be listening to the development department, who wouldn't be listening to the marketing department or the events department. So we're the foundation. We all have to get in the room. And so part of that was actually starting to build out this mission, purpose, vision, values, which then leads into a collective strategic plan, which we're going through right now. But I think most importantly, we did an exercise this year in which we engaged literally tens of thousands of Canadians. Like, we asked them for their opinions. We asked our members, we asked coaches, we asked officials, we asked fans, and then, importantly, the membership, the people that are actually running hockey. And we were asking more profound questions. It isn't just, should we do this or should we do that? It's where are we right now? Like, where are you on this journey of hockey? What do you see as the real issues that are keeping us from being the absolute best that we can be? So that's a lot of heavy lifting, and we're combing through that right now. There's a number of things that have emerged to me that I probably, I think most of us on this call, probably from reading the paper, could pick out what some of those things are. But I think it's not just saying, okay, now I've heard you, I'm gonna go away and I'm gonna answer the question. So I'll give an example. One thing that we could see is that women and girls aren't well represented in the sport. We tend to do well on the stage, and for the first time ever, last year there was over 100,000 women and girls that played, but there's still only 20% of the players, and we produce really good players out of our system. About 60% of the PWHL are Canadian players. So, what you need to, coming out of that, it wasn't just sort of, okay, we better just go away and make a plan to address women and girls. Is you have to invite women and girls into the planning. So we put together a steering committee of 12, I would call, influential people, many of whom are, some of them are alumni from the national women's team. Some of them are sort of from outside the system, but who have an interest in women, in the growth of women and girls sport. There's researchers, there's academics, there's people in universities, there's all kinds of people that have come together to say, here's what we've learned, now what do we do about it? And part of what we do about it is continue consulting. Like, it isn't just good enough for us to say we found solutions, it's to bring those solutions back to Canadians and say, help us mold these, own them, be a partner in all of this, be a partner in growing this game for women and girls. It's an amazing game the Canadians have a lot of pride in. So let's let Canadians help us not just tell what they want and we go away and do it, but actually take some ownership in helping grow it. That may sound very airy-fairy at this point, but I think really what it is, it's partnering with the people that want something from us, is to say, you have some skin in the game here too.
Yeah, I'm reminded, we have researchers in our department who've conducted a massive study of 10,000 Canadians, and really in-depth consultations as well as surveys and stuff around what primary care and family medicine should look like. And this idea of going out to the people and asking them what they want has been very powerful, I think, for many of us. It's called the Our Care study, partly because, of course, we get the feedback ourselves as clinicians and leaders in family medicine about what people want and expect and feel they have a right to expect from us, actually, which is, a shift in some instances, like, we're not doing anybody any favors by providing these services. Like, actually, they have a right to expect these services of us, but also that when we go to talk to government or other stakeholders, it's not, oh, it's the doctors here telling us how we should, the experts or whatever. Like, this is the voice of the people who use the healthcare system. And in the case of talking to an elected official or a politician, that's the voice of the voter and the constituent and the person who can put you in your job and take you out of your job as an elected, democratically elected leader. And I think that shift from listening to experts, in quotes, and listening to people who experience these things every day is really profound, and it's happening in a lot of places. Will you release any of the data when you're ready? Like, do you have a plan to share what you're learning there, or do you feel like that's internal learning for your own organization?
No, I think we should release, and anything that we can legally, we should release. I've been a pretty big proponent of that. Uh, I'll use this women and girls study. So we've actually put together a discussion paper, and we're releasing it to Canadians. You'll probably see it over the next number of weeks. And really, it's meant to stir debate. And it's got everything from our governance structures to the visibility of female athletes to ice equity. I mean, it really has, it's got everything in it. And it's got, like it's asking more questions. I think it doesn't really provide answers. And what we're going to do is we've engaged, probably similar to our care. We've engaged an organization that's going to go out and ask any Canadian that wants to talk to us, these profound questions about what they want from their hockey system, and then publish the results and hold ourselves accountable to delivering them, or be able to put our hand up and say, here's something that we cannot deliver in terms of the current system, and speak a little bit of truth to power, to our elected officials, to the people that, some of the hockey gods that live in the various towns and communities. If they're not delivering what people need, it's okay to call them out on it.
Any surprises in the data that you're looking through? You went out and asked, like, was it all what you expected? Were there any things that threw you off a bit?
No, you know what? I mean, I guess it's not surprising, but it's maybe a bit disheartening. I mean, I think the hockey system in Canada, probably like the health system in Ontario, I guess that's what we're talking about, has on one hand, there's lots of good related to it. And it's been around for so long. And in some ways, it's something that so many people are proud of, that I'm looking at some of the potential solutions to all of this. And I think they should be relatively easy, but there just seems to be such resistance to change, that some of the stuff that it's systemic and it's doable, and some of it's probably legislatable. If somebody really wanted to stand up and do the heavy lifting and sort of take the slings and arrows for it. But they're just, I don't know if it's inertia or maybe hidden underneath glorious tradition. I don't know what it is, but it is really trying to get some people to move on some things. So I wouldn't say I was surprised. I'm just surprised at the lack of maybe enthusiasm for going and making some changes that could really profoundly change things. This is a project, sounds like a side project, but what I've really been looking at as well, and perhaps you do this as well in medicine, I've been looking at other systems, other sports systems. I've been looking at some of the work that the Aspen Institute in the US does, but I've met with the deputy or the retired deputy of sport in Norway, for example, and said, why do 93% of children in Norway, play sport, and we can't even hit half in Canada, and there's lots of really good reasons. And I take a look at that and I say, there are so many things. And here's a really interesting link to what we're talking about. In Norway, 93% of children play sport. It's free. It's completely barrier-free from an economic perspective. And kids have to play in their own community, and communities are expected to be able to deliver a sport of choice to children. They get incented to do that. But what the Norwegians have found over time, there's three main things in my mind. Is, first of all, the kids have a really good sense of community, and actually petty crime is lower and has been declining over 20 years since Norway chartered. The children have a right to play sport in Norway. They do better in school. Like there's healthy active living that's associated with playing sport, and they don't specialize too early. So these kids are playing sport with their friends. They're not playing. I've certainly experienced having to drive around because you've got a kid that plays elite hockey, and different teams want them, and you're trying to figure that all out. But I think the most important thing that you're seeing in Norway is their healthcare costs have started to decline over time. You've got a healthy, active population that goes on to live as adults, continuing to play sports in their communities with their friends, and they have, they're healthier population. So, in my mind, there's some things that we could be doing, but the first thing is you have to start figuring out, not just $500 tax credit for people that want to put their kids in $3,000 hockey. It's any kid that wants to play hockey, how do we get them on the ice in a safe way?
Yeah, I mean, that's, first of all, what a great example. And we often look to Norway too, and to other Scandinavian countries to learn about, because there's a lot of stuff that they do really well. And these kind of fundamental universal public services, whether it's sport for kids or primary care, are right at the top of that list. And it, of course, community sport is a health intervention. And so I think what you're saying is really true. You mentioned every kid who wants, making things accessible to every kid. And we've kind of come at this question of equity and, who's been traditionally left out through a couple of different ways. And I'm wondering if you could just begin by describing a little bit like what you saw when you came in about where the biggest gaps were in accessibility of hockey. You've mentioned gender is one. Were there others? And that change to make a system more inclusive is always going to be tough. And I'm wondering if you're willing to share some stories with us about some of the hard parts of that transformation.
Yeah, well, I mean, some of this stuff is, again, I think there's some really neat corollaries to the health system. By the way, I was, I'm not totally unaware. I was on the board of Michael Garron Hospital for about 10 years, and I'm still, and not on the foundation board, on the hospital board. So, and I've still stayed, quite involved with them over many years. And I've also was a chair of the board of like a local a CHC, a community health center here in the beach area where I live in Toronto. But I think when we talk about accessibility, I grew up in Thunder Bay, Ontario, and we all learned to skate at the Carrick rink. And I could skate anytime I wanted because it was an outdoor rink. And there was a number of them. There was like in Thunder Bay, you couldn't drive within 6 city blocks without coming to an outdoor skating rink that any kid could go to, unless there was an outdoor hockey game. I knew what the schedule was. It was on my fridge underneath a magnet, and I knew when I could go and skate. And we don't have that anymore. Climate change has eliminated probably about 80% of the rinks that used to be, in Canada in the winter. So it removes some accessibility. So ergo, you have indoor ice, which is extremely expensive and hard on the planet to make. And then it's compounded by, and this was the same with curling. There used to be 7,000 curling rinks that many of them were in people's barns, or they were kind of outdoors in the winter. And now you have to be inside with an ice plant, in parking lots and safety equipment and all those other things. Like some of this stuff is good, but it does remove sort of instant and community accessibility. It starts involving, transportation, certainly economics. The other part, though, is if you go outside of Canada, and it's hard to imagine that outside of Canada, that people are afraid of ice and playing sports on ice. And when you have 1 million people entering the country, in an 18-month period, and most of them come from countries where there's neither snow or ice, it isn't just that people haven't seen it before. There's fear about putting on sharp blades and sending your child out onto the ice. And so, part of access is really starting to understand those fears and what those barriers are. And I think there's maybe a little bit of a feeling like if we can just show people new to the country, how great skating is, that somehow they're going to want to do this without really kind of thinking about the pressures of being new to the country. And it's probably not the top of the list for, many parents is to say, well, I've just arrived and I'm figuring out a new language and a new school system, and I'm trying to keep my kids safe and I'm trying to keep food on the table. But, first and foremost, I better sign them up for curling or hockey or soccer. Like, that just is not the reality. So I think, what we need to do is to start to work with communities to really kind of understand what their priorities are and whether our sport can deliver against those priorities. And there's a woman that, you may have heard of, and if I can give you a little anecdote, because she's just gave me sort of a profound thinking. This is when I was with curling, and it was during COVID, and I found this little organization called DILOT. It was called Developing Young Leaders of Tomorrow Today. It was put together by a woman named Candace Kochepa, who was looking for, it was an organization looking at Black children who had high leadership qualities, but seemed to be kind of stymied in those. And she was trying to work with and she had a program called Lead Like a Girl, and the other one is called the Black Diplomats Academy. And I contacted her, and basically I phoned her and I said, like, you have the worst website I have ever seen. I'd like to help you out, but I can't even figure out how to get hold of you. And this took me 10 minutes to even just figure out how to get hold of you. Anyway, she and I developed this really great friendship and I ended up doing quite a bit of work with her. And I just have utmost respect for what she's trying to do. But at one point I came with the brilliant idea that, why don't we introduce some of your girls to curling? And, I was talking about all the lessons that you learn from, team building and learning from failure and all the typical stuff. And she said, you know what, Kathy, my girls don't need that. She goes, you know what they need more than anything is to learn how to navigate unfamiliar situations. These are leadership girls who have not been put in places. And she said, if you could reframe your program. And I said, okay, why don't we do this? We'll take your girls and we'll bring them up to the Thornhill Golf and Country Club. And if that's not a familiar space for them and their parents, we are going to bend over backwards to make sure that we understand exactly what would make them comfortable there. And we're going to work with this community. And that was a real, because at the end of the day, the curling was just sort of an outcome. And these kids ended up joining. Some of them are unbelievable. They ended up going into these leagues and just blowing everyone away. But really, the program became about really serving that community's needs. And the sport was sort of a fringe benefit because they were having fun while they were doing it. And I think sometimes with sport, we just sort of want people to accept sport for sport's sake, or because we think it's good for you. Hockey people think hockey's good for everyone. And I'm not sure we've ever really asked the question in a different way. The way Candace described is don't ask me how sport, is good for me. Ask me what's good for me overall. And does can you mold your offering into something that truly helps enhance, my life in some ways. And I think if we start thinking about sport or medicine or art, culture, dance, education that way, I think we just all end up with a better experience. Because as I said, at the end of the day, we ended up with this tremendous cohort of girls that came into this situation. And some of them have gone on to join a league and be like really kick-ass curlers as well. So
it's amazing. What a great story and a wonderful example, really concrete example of that learning. So what about the hard parts around change? We go through this, we're going through this in our department, and in our university and in our healthcare system. You have had to engage on questions of locker rooms and who takes off their clothes and who doesn't take off their clothes in the locker room, and what the level of punishment is for using a slur against another player or child in the sport, or whatever. Like all of these, we change culture. One of the ways we change culture is by changing the regulatory frameworks around that culture to be consistent with the values that we say we are about, and that often means driving change through a system that is not necessarily always open to it, or people who
Yeah.
don't necessarily immediately see the value in it. Can you talk a little bit about where you found it easier or harder to do that, or even just share some stories and learnings from that journey?
Yeah, yeah, okay. Well, I think the dressing room policy is probably a good one, but maybe I'll start off with, I think there's some things that we've had to do from a cultural perspective. One is we've asked some people to come in and assess the culture in our high performance programs right now to make sure that from, if we're going to set standards for the rest of the country, we better make sure that we can stand up and be counted. And that's uncomfortable. We've gone into, we're a gold medal winning, high performance, is to say, clearly something in our culture is driving winning. But is it winning in the right way? So we've had to ask ourselves those questions. So I think so we have some external people that are going through and we're getting some really good learning right now. I think this, second part is we've taken a look at, we know where there's issues right now. And we're doing quite a bit of research. We did something called Beyond the Boards, which really looks at toxic masculinity and starts to say, I can tell you right now from our data, and I'm going to come to the dressing room policy, but I can tell you right now from our data that there is something that is going on in our system. And I think everyone is going to nod their head when I say where the issues are. It's boys and men that are about the age of, they're elite hockey players. So they're playing at the very high end of our system when they're about 14 or 15 to when they're about 21. And I've had the question asked to me, well, boys and men when they're in that age group tend to be a bit more reckless and not think about consequences. And I said, yeah, but I have a database right now that I think would be highly representative of that, because I've got every kid that plays house league right up to AAA and junior A hockey, or major junior, and I can tell you the complaints, the maltreatment, the harassment, the abuse, all of the is concentrated in this one area. So there is something in our system that is allowing or cajoling, I don't know, enabling this behavior to happen. And so we've got to get to the root of that. So I will tell you right now, we are working with a number of researchers, a couple of them at U of T, at McGill, and some people from the UK, to kind of look at what are the, basically it's my working title, kind of what are the effects of an elite hockey system on the character development of these young people. To come back to the dressing room policy, I mean, this is, I think, where a national body does come in, is to say, we talk a lot about culture change and people kind of wring their hands and whatnot. But at some point you have to just step up and say, we're going to make a regulation about this. The dressing room policy, despite what people might have read, is not a woke policy. The critics of it like to critique it. And say that this is political in some way. It has nothing to do with that. What we were finding in our research is hockey has changed. It's no longer a bunch of guys sitting around towel whipping each other in the locker room. We have mixed teams. We have boys and girls. We have kids who are more comfortable, and are coming out. For example, they're LGBT. Q2+ communities. We've got kids that have told us that going through puberty and changing in front of one another is uncomfortable for them. And so basically what we said is there's enough discomfort in this whole area of changing in front of one another that we need to do something about it. Because one thing that we do know is that a lot of team building happens in the locker room. That's where you discuss the game. That's where you turn on the music. That's where you put your sticks in. That's when you do a lot of things in the locker room that we know are really important. And we were leaving kids out. And, my son used to play when he was a bit younger. There was a girl on his team who was just unreal, could stick 8 circles around them when they were young. But back then she had to go into the manager's office and change. She was missing stuff. And it always struck me as being hugely unfair, that somehow she was missing out pieces of this. Like, she would come in afterwards, but you had to go in and check and make sure all the kids were dressed. So basically what this is, we say, you have to wear, we call it a base layer. You have to just stay in your underwear, just don't strip down naked in front of people. We're not going to allow that anymore. And if you want to take a shower, which lots of kids want to do, just wear your bathing suit. And that means everyone can be in the locker room. No one has to be uncomfortable. No one has to take their clothes off when they don't want to in front of other people. And we announced it as a policy, and we said, and everyone's going to be beholden to it. And so, we did this with our members, and we have, our expectation is there's going to be 100% compliance, and there's not. But there is a lot of chatter from people who have traditionally said, well, the guys sitting around with their shirts off, that's a big part of hockey. And my answer is, well, it isn't anymore. I think you have to be a little bit like that. But this didn't come from me, and it didn't come from our high performance director. It came from people that play hockey and who want their kids to stay. It's parents and children that want to stay in hockey and have and want to be in a place where they always feel safe and comfortable. And I think we should be happy that we can provide that, not kind of beholden. And this certainly didn't come from some political group. It came from children and that want to play hockey in a safe, comfortable way.
I think it's such an important illustration of what you've been saying all through this conversation, which is that when the policy comes from the listening to the people who use the service, it makes it pretty unassailable, actually. So, and of course people will complain nevertheless, but you can feel confident. What I hear in your voice is that you are confident about it, and
yes,
and you can push through that resistance where you might encounter it, because you know where it's coming from. It's coming from the users themselves. We're getting some great questions in the Q&A, so one of our participants asks, what strategies do hockey players use to maintain focus during high pressure situations that could be useful for family doctors?
Yeah, well, I should, if you want to have me come back, or not me, I can bring someone from our high performance team, because we certainly have those people. So I will say, I'm maybe not going to totally answer the question, but I mean, I think from a high performance team, I think we've really switched our philosophy over the last little while, and I'm really glad to see that. It's to become quite athlete centered. So the question really is what does the coach think is best for the athlete? You need some of that, but the athlete needs to be able to trust the coach to say, this is what I need in order to perform at my best. And we need, our job is to be able to provide an environment where all athletes can perform at their best. And I think one of the things that we, had been probably very good at is we understand that the technical part, the X's and O's on the whiteboard, and probably the nutrition and the physio and all of those things. But over the last number of years, I think there's been a great deal of focus on the mental preparation and the pressure that it takes. And particularly, I've seen it, and I've been up close to many athletes. When you put a maple leaf on and you're playing hockey or you're curling, the expectations aren't just that you're going to bring home a medal. It's going to be a certain color of medal, and providing a lot of mental health and mental performance support for those athletes when they bear the burden of that. We don't put that pressure on them necessarily, but social media, these kids have all grown up wanting to stand on the podium and represent Canada. When they get there, it is hugely it's frightening for a lot of them for the first time. I didn't even say the first time, the 10th time you step out on the ice. It's not easy, and elite athletes nowadays, given all the things that I've just talked about, I think just experience unique pressures that they wouldn't have experienced 20 years ago. And so what we do is there's significant resources that we put into developing mental and emotional and social support plans for each athlete that is bespoke to what their needs are, in addition to all the technical training and the centralized training and the special diets and the physio and the athletic therapy and the medical attention that we give them.
Such a great parallel, actually. And, you know, it's true for our patients as family doctors that there's always whatever we can do to support them physically, and always the mental health support and aspect that comes alongside that. It's one of the ways that we think of family medicine as, you know, it's being kind of built in that holistic view of what it takes to help somebody get healthy. But it's also true for us as family physicians. And for those who are on the call that haven't heard of our Peers for Joy in Work program at DFCM, we're going to put the link in the chat, because we are actually in the process of recruiting right now new participants to this program that is absolutely about trying to support family docs in finding the joy in our daily work. So, you know, we can help with the logistical stuff about how do you, you know, get through your admin burden and get home in time to have dinner with your family, or other kind of logistical things in your office. But a lot of that program is also about that mental support and psychological. How do we think about our work? How do we approach our work? How do we deal with that's something that might throw us off, you know, whatever the equivalent of a bad call is, you know, on the ice, and not let it derail our whole game, or our whole day, or our whole experience. I think that there are lots of parallels in there. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's lots of commonality here. Maybe we need a partnership between our department
Absolutely.
and your organization. We've talked, there have been a lot more similarities than I even realized there would be in this conversation. And I'm really grateful for your time. One last question, because we've got so many family doctors who want to know about it. Is there something you wish family docs, whether it's around head injuries or physical injuries, or the kind of mental and emotional thing, is there one thing you feel that we could do for you? And for you, I mean for sport, and in our daily work in helping kids and athletes at all levels to fully engage.
Yeah, one of the things, I mean, it's more of an observation that I've seen. I had, as I mentioned, I have two kids that, well, one that played hockey, but two kids that played elite volleyball as well. Is just the anxiety that young people feel when they have an injury, be it, you know, physical or even, you know, a mental injury. You know, I will say, I know that there were some pre-questions, and I do want to let you know we have very significant concussion protocols, and we do quite a bit of work in the area right now of body checking, and you know, we're looking at creating kind of as safe a sport as you can when you're playing on skates and on ice. You know, it's related to equipment, and you know, there's natural risk that's in there. I'd say one, you know, if you're treating young people with injuries, is just reassuring them. I mean, that sport will come back to them, and people do recover from injuries. And we just see these kids that want to get back on the ice, or back on the court, when they're not ready to come back, and just the anxiety that they're going to be left behind. The second thing I would say to family docs is you know, there's lots of teams out there that could just really use some volunteer expertise, and it's really fun with kids. And having people that are well trained in that area just really helps. We didn't have like when my son was playing, he was playing out in Scarborough on an elite team. One of the coaches was also an EMT, and I just remember, like, just kind of as a parent, I was quite reassured by that. But secondly, he was so good at pulling kids when they weren't ready to go off the ice, and reassuring them that they were going to get back on the ice, and that he was going to make sure that they were healthy. That he just created this really good dynamic in the team, that you know, having an injury didn't mean that you weren't going to be center anymore, or you weren't going to be on the first line. It meant you just had to take some time to recover, and you weren't going to be left behind. So I think there's a young athletes. It's very competitive out there, and I think they need reassurances from a lot of people, that sport is always going to be there for them.
That's a beautiful way to end, and an amazing observation. And hopefully their family doctors will also always be there for them.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Katherine Henderson, for this really rich conversation. I'm very grateful to you, and I know our whole department is grateful. And best of luck on this really important journey that you're on with Hockey Canada. We are all cheering for you as you endeavor to steer the sport into a more inclusive future. And for those who are not aware, our next session is going to be about AI and tech and how it can save you and your practice. Professor Enid Montague, who's an engineer, is going to come. Her entire area of study is the interaction between technology and healthcare workers. And she is going to bring some really transformative ideas to us as family physicians about how we can use technology in our practices to get more joy from our own work and deliver better service to our patients. Thank you all for joining us this morning, and special thanks to you, Katherine Henderson. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.